Authenticity is a somewhat elusive concept. We know we want it, we can see it or the lack of it in others, and it looks different on each individual in a way that makes it hard to fully define. In 2023, Merriam-Webster named authenticity its word of the year. And even there, they had 4 different definitions of it. But I think that there's something hidden underneath the surface of baseline authenticity. I think if we're willing to pause and look a little deeper, we'll see that there's the potential for authentic power. And we can find this via shapeshifting. Now, shapeshifting isn't about discarding parts of yourself in order to try and be more palatable or to, project yourself as being something that you're not, but rather it's about deconstructing and reconstructing your real elements and your real values to meet the moment and to meet any given environment. And think about where we are right now. We're on Water Street, and water is the perfect metaphor for shapeshifting, because whether it's a solid or a liquid or a gas, it is still unequivocally water. Don't fake it till you make it. Do it right until you win the fight. I think that shapeshifting is the key to authentic power, and my life taught me that in the hard way. I was a baseball player from a very young age, and my parents and my family saw the potential for something great there. I first heard my parents refer to it as my career when I was 9 years old, and that is crazy. But at the same time, I sort of understand where they were coming from. They saw this capability within me, and they didn't have the resources or opportunities to develop it. So as they saw this potential, they wanted to put their all into making sure that that actualized. And so they pushed me. Baseball was this very interesting thing that I had a very complicated relationship with, because on the one hand, I was good, and it's fun to succeed as a kid. I also noticed that my success positively impacted the people around me. I noticed my teammates would celebrate anytime I hit a home run or had a strikeout or did something for the team, and that made me feel like I was a part of this cohesive environment, like I was contributing. On the other hand, I couldn't do any of the performing arts. I couldn't play any other sport, and I was frustrated and sometimes resentful that I wasn't able to do anything else because I was always practicing. And yet baseball provided a framework for my life. It provided a template. It helped me understand that consistency and diligence in any given direction can be momentous, not just for an individual, but for those around them. It also showed me that hard work, good vibes, and a temperament of absolute perseverance can take any individual or group from someplace small into someplace great. And so I faced this complexity through a lot of practice and a lot of missed episodes of Power Rangers. But eventually I came to this understanding that there was more out there via baseball. Now, as I continue to go about my baseball career, that seedling of potential was real. I continued to practice. I established all of these values and I pursued them. And over time, I was on this very direct and linear path. Doing well on this team led to the next team, led to this next showcase, which led to college scouts coming after me, which led to a college scholarship, which then led to being drafted the first time and then turning that down, being drafted the second time. There was always something to work towards, always a clear next step. And everybody around me seemed to want that for me, but I was also very well aware that there was one value that I was not living into, and that was true integrity, because I was not living fully authentically at that time. I had a secret. I've known that I'm gay since I was 7 years old, And I also knew that I had to conceal it in order to survive. And from a very young age, it was made very clear to me that there are certain ways in which you can live and certain ways in which you couldn't. And so I tried to establish a dream that would work for me. I said, I'll be the first gay, openly gay baseball player. But I realized even that is just a noble dream, but it's not my dream. So when I was around 21, I decided that it was time to go in a different direction. And I did something risky and bold and difficult all at the same time. I left baseball, moved to New York City, and came out. And all of my worst nightmares came true. Within 6 months, I found myself disowned, estranged from my family, and homeless in New York City. And during that time, I first encountered the real impetus for shapeshifting, the real need to shapeshift. I had to deconstruct and reconstruct myself towards a new goal because I no longer had the obvious next goal in baseball. There was no moving from rookie ball to AA to AAA and beyond. Now it was, I need to figure out how to get a roof over my head. At the time, I was a bouncer at a small dive bar at the end of Christopher Street in the West Village. It was kind of one of those bars where the floor is always sticky and it's a little bit questionable. But I went to that bar because I was friends with the owner of that bar. And I told him my situation, and he lived above the bar. And so he said, hold on one second. He ran upstairs, talked to his roommates, and he said, you're free to couch surf here as long as you need to. And he saved me, quite literally, in that moment. And during that time, I also realized that I needed to establish a next goal to work towards. I was making about the equivalent of $30,000 a year as a bouncer, and I established my first kind of out of reach yet doable goal, which is I'm going to make $100,000 by this time next year. Important detail, actually. I added a calendar invite into my phone for myself to then see that for 1 year from that moment. And so I went about the business of doing that by reconstructing myself with the same elements of what it took to be a baseball player. So then I went about the business of making this happen. I convinced them to let me become a bartender where at least I could be in control of my own financial destiny if I were to get good tips. And I treated my first 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Monday bartending shift as if it was the World Series. I was getting out there on the mound, and this is game time, baby. And it's because I went about it with that attitude as if it was the most important thing, and consistently went about it with that attitude as if it was the most important thing, eventually, that happy hour started to really grow and become robust. Over time, my bosses obviously noticed that. They gave me more shifts. Other bars started to notice that, and one bar in particular, with a very high volume and that was very popular, tried to poach me. Another one of my values is loyalty. I went to my bosses and I told them exactly what was going on. I said, if you happen to move me to your other bar, which was a high-volume gay sports bar in Chelsea, then I can still work for you and I'll be in a better situation. And that's ultimately what they did. So I showed up to that bar with my full self, and that register multiplied. I went in there with verve and gusto and with the vibe of just Team Captain Kenny. You know, he's always here for a good time. And as a result, I was able to build more and more momentum. So fast forward now to a year, when I put that initial calendar invite in my phone, I was counting at the bar, and then suddenly this little light goes off. I look over, I realized what it was, and then I sat back for a moment and did some math. And I realized I was making over $100,000 with health benefits, working 4 nights a week. And I took this big breath, and then I let it out, and I just broke down. And just like a wave crashing, it's this big moment of energetic exertion, but then it quickly dissipates. And then there's this deafening silence there. And so I had this moment of huge elation and celebration that became deflation right then and there. Because suddenly I no longer had that next goal, that next thing to work towards. And so I did what water does when it stops flowing. I stagnated, and I festered. and I tried to answer a new apparent void with the closest thing that was thankfully not alcohol, but was sugar. And so I just started with, a little sweet treat at the end of each shift, because that's fine, we all deserve a little sweet treat. But that little sweet treat turned into nightly sugar binges, which turned into the following vicious cycle. It would start with me going and having my bartending shift, 7 p.m. to 2:30 in the morning, maybe, sometimes 4:30. And then I would leave, sometimes go all the way uptown to the Sprinkles Cupcake ATM and buy a dozen. They're open all night. Come back downtown, get a chicken cutlet sandwich because protein, and a coconut water because health, along with a bunch of Haribo gummies and some ice cream. And I would do this every night, and I would eat all of that right before bed, go to bed feeling really guilty, barely get any sleep because you can't really sleep while your body's trying to digest all of that, wake up and feel horrible about myself, go to the gym and punish myself with 2 hours of steady state cardio on the elliptical, which was degrading my muscle tissue and just totally throwing my hormonal balance into imbalance, out of whack. And I was on this cycle for months and months and months, and it felt like there was no escape until one day this guy named Patrick walked into the bar on a rainy Sunday evening. And he had a little chip on his shoulder, and he was there with his boyfriend, and they were watching the football game and taking shots of whiskey. And he started to rave about this boot camp gym that he was recently hired as an instructor at. And I remember feeling the genuine and authentic nature of what he was saying on my skin. I felt it. And I was inspired, and we became Facebook friends. And after that, I would see his posts almost daily, if not actually daily, of him with all of these other sweaty, glowing, beaming faces after his boot camp classes. And I would be seeing these posts as I wake up from my non-sleep of terrible, vicious cycle. So finally, after a few weeks of this, I woke up, I saw the post, I threw on the same shorts from the night before, and a shirt, but the shorts are more important. And I went over to that gym. I went in and I spoke with the manager. I didn't know he was the manager. And he was explaining how things worked. He's like, this isn't a normal gym. It's a boutique studio, and so we only have classes. Here's how the breakdown goes. A class is X amount of dollars. Introductory 3-pack is this. And then I saw something over his shoulder that said, 30 classes in 30 days, silver something package. And I was like, what's that about? He's like, well, it's exactly what it sounds like, 30 classes in 30 days, and it's for really dedicated members. And then he started to go off into this further explanation, and I cut him off. And I was like, actually, that's what I'll take. And I took $500 out of my pocket from the night before, and I threw it on the table. And I wished for the sake of the story that it was in singles, but it was in 20s. And he looked at me a little quizzically, and then he was just like, okay. And so I ended up taking all 30 classes in 20 days, or 21 days, better yet. And he noticed that because I also stopped eating sugar right then and there for at least a short enough period of time to notice a significant change. He invited me to instructor training after I talked to him a little bit about baseball and my history. I got my first group fitness certification, and I went. I was shaky at best when it came to instructor training, but that was another moment in which I had to deconstruct, okay, there is a certain element of something that got version of Kenny that needed to survive and live a double life for so long. There's a certain way in which he plans and organizes himself that I can pull from. And there's a certain kind of hustle in building community that Kenny from the bar also leans into that I can pull from. So I started to deconstruct myself and reconstruct myself towards this new thing. I was shapeshifting into this new persona of who I could be. And so I went through instructor training, again, very shaky, got through, and I started out by subbing other people's classes. So when you're subbing other people's classes, it's a great time to just kind of get your reps in. You're learning how to cue a fitness class. It has its own skill set, but I didn't know my own voice yet. I didn't really understand who I was. And it wasn't until I had my very first class with my ownership in which I established that voice. And I did that by reclaiming that integrity that I had to sacrifice for so long growing up. I said, what if I'm just honest to these people on the microphone? What if I just say to them the things that I said to myself when I was literally pulling myself out of the gutter? And so that's exactly what I did. I got on the mic and I was transparent. And I reminded them that they weren't their current circumstances, but rather the people with the potential to achieve their goals and to reach for more. I reminded them that they had an inherent tenacity and an optional audacity if they wish to take it, in which they can take a stand for themselves, regardless of the circumstances around them. And I showed up as baseball gusto Kenny every single time. And because I showed up as my full self, those classes filled up as well. We keep that going, and over the course of 15 years now, big time skip, that gym led to another opportunity, which led to a whole grand adventure that put me on this stage here, where I'm also an on-camera coach for Tonal and an in-person coach for Lifetime and on camera as well. But all of that came about because I was willing to face the parts of myself that I wanted to disgrace. We are more than our circumstances. If we choose to shift our shape, we are more than our opportunities too, because here's the thing. When you choose to shapeshift into another elevated version of you, you also affect the people around you. My favorite quote is one that I heard from Oprah, but she was actually quoting Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it's that not everyone can be famous, but everyone can be great, because greatness is determined by service. The greatest service that you can ever do is to be your real self and to care enough to help other people be their real selves. So I'll leave you with this. Once again, authenticity is never, ever about pushing through, about fake it until you make it. It's about do it right until you win the fight, and that is authentic power. Thank you.